Hi, my name is Rebecca Casey. I'm the Director of Policy and Quality Management, and today we're going to talk about internal incident reporting for direct support professionals. So the first thing that we're going to do is look at the what, the why, the when, and the how of reporting, and then we'll move on to talk about the internal incident report form that you'll find with a Google form. We'll move on to discussing all of the reportable incidents and how you would report it, and then we're going to discuss some takeaways. So let's look at the what. What are we reporting? We're reporting any type of employee injury that occurs, any abuse, neglect, exploitation, any safety concerns, any injury, any use of restrictive interventions, any medication-specific incidents, and any other incidents. Why are we doing this? A lot of this is to protect the health and safety of the people that we support, as well as to protect the health and safety of our employees. But we are also mandatory reporters within this field and must report anything to the state that they deem to be a huge health and safety risk. And then we also want to report some things to OPG too, because it could be a trend that we need to track. When do we do this? You're going to contact your supervisor immediately if there's an employee injury, if there's any abuse, neglect, exploitation, or mistreatment allegations, or if there's any severe health and safety issues. For all other issues, you have 24 hours to report that. And how are you going to do that? You're going to fill out the internal incident report form. That's a Google form that will be found on the hub, or it will be found on your Google Chromebook. And then you're going to make sure that you submit that to your supervisor and contact your supervisor in any situation that would require it. So with the internal incident report Google form, you're going to look at that website and go there. A lot of times it's really smart for you to make a link on your phone so that you'd be able to report from anywhere. You're going to complete the prompts for the form, and the first prompt starts and asks you whether this involves an employee injury, an injury or illness of a person that you support, or an abuse, neglect, exploitation allegation. So you'll first submit those. Sometimes incidents have multiple areas. So it could be that an employee injury occurred and so did a situation of abuse, neglect, and exploitation. If both of those things did occur, you would have to fill out 2 internal incident reports instead of just the one. And then you are also just going to remember to contact your supervisor immediately for those employee injuries, that abuse, neglect, exploitation, and any severe safety and health issues. So with employee injury, any employee injury that ranges from minor to significant needs to be reported to OPG within 24 hours. Any type of injury that requires basic first aid or more than basic first aid still needs to be reported, just in case a more serious issue comes up for the employee. Another area that is really important is that if your injury requires medical evaluation, you must contact OPG. If for some reason you're incapacitated during this time, your supervisor can fill out the internal incident report on your behalf. You're going to contact your supervisor if your injury is not life-threatening but requires medical evaluation, because your supervisor will then talk to the Director of Business Operations to determine where you can go to get treatment and have it covered underneath our workers' compensation. If your injury is life-threatening though, call 911 and seek immediate help. So some of the areas of incidents that we are going to look at, one of those areas is abuse, neglect, exploitation, and mistreatment. So any actual, alleged, or suspected abuse that occurs, or neglect, or exploitation, or any version of mistreatment must be reported within 24 hours to OPG. You should contact your supervisor immediately and make sure you fill out that internal incident report within the 24 hours. If it is an OPG staff member who's allegedly the abuser or neglectful, we will go in and have to suspend that person per our policy. And through that suspension procedure, there's an investigation that occurs to see whether it's a substantiated claim or an unsubstantiated claim. The reason you need to talk to your supervisor is we need to get that person off of shift to make sure that it isn't a substantiated claim of abuse. And then any peer-to-peer aggression, you are also going to report. Any peer-to-peer aggression that results in significant injury to one person receiving services to another, you report, and any injury that is just even minor. So this is going to be reported through that internal incident Google form. And then a lot of the examples for abuse, neglect, and exploitation are found in the abuse, neglect, and exploitation video. So please look at that if you want more examples of signs and areas of concern. So another category is safety concerns. So any place that you are in, whether it's a home or a place where somebody is receiving services that has a structural or environmental problem that could jeopardize the health and welfare of the person you support, is going to be reported. For example, if there's mold in a home, it could be an environmental issue that affects that person, so you have to report it. A fire at a service delivery site or a fire where the person that you support is around it must also be reported, because it could jeopardize the health and safety of that person. Any incident of elopement or running away, especially if they're evading that required level of supervision found in their individualized support plan, must be reported. And then if a person is a missing person, then you have to report it through the internal incident report form, but you must also immediately call 911 and describe to the police officer who the person is, and please tell the police officer that the person has a disability, because they have specialized training for helping people with disabilities in those situations. And then we're also going to report injury. So you're going to report any significant or minor injuries. Significant injuries range from a fracture, a burn, which could be a sunburn, or scalding that's greater than 1st degree, but any burn you are going to report. Any choking that requires intervention like the Heimlich maneuver or back blows must also be reported. Bruises or contusions that are larger than 3 inches in any direction, or a pattern of bruising, must also be reported, because the pattern of bruising could be indicative of abuse, neglect, and exploitation. If a person has a laceration that requires more than basic first aid, for example, if they would go to the hospital to get stitches for a cut, then that's going to be something that you report. But any cuts that occur are also areas that you report. It's really important for us to look at both of those areas, because the state wants to know information about one of them, and OPG wants to know information about the more minor injury. Any occurrence of skin breakdown that results in an ulcer would also be something that you report, whether it's a diabetic ulcer or whether it's a bed sore. Any injury that requires more than basic first aid and any puncture wound from an animal or human bite must also be reported. And then any pica ingestion, which is where a person ingests non-food substances, must also be reported within 24 hours of discovery. Another area is injury. So with injury, any injury to an individual where the cause is unknown and the injury could be indicative of abuse and neglect and exploitation are going to be areas that you report, especially if that injury is unknown and requires medical evaluation and treatment. A fall that results in injury must also be reported regardless of the severity of injury, but you must also report falls that have no injury, just in case days later there does happen to be a bruise that comes up. We can know that it came from that fall that occurred. And then what we're going to do is we're also going to report any use of restrictive interventions. So restrictive interventions are when you restrict a person's movements or rights. So a restrictive intervention that is used because of a physical symptom or a medical or psychiatric condition or any other event must be reported immediately through the internal incident report form. So that would be an example of that could be when you're walking down the street with somebody you support and they try to walk out into traffic, and maybe you grab their arm to ensure that they don't walk straight and directly into traffic and get hurt. You did the right thing by helping that person and not allowing them to get hit, but that still restricted their movement, and we still must report the use of that. And then we're also going to report any use of physical or mechanical restraints, regardless of whether it was planned in a behavior support plan, regardless of whether it has received Human Rights Committee approval, and regardless of whether the person consented to it. OPG tries to be a hands-off company. We don't have a restraint procedure, so most of the time you will not have to utilize this restraint procedure. And then we're also going to report any use of restrictions for a person's basic human rights. So there are a couple medication-specific areas that we also have you report. The first is that when there is a medication error that occurs, and a medication error is when the wrong medication is given, the wrong dose is given, there was a missed medication, so it wasn't given at all, the medication was given the wrong route, or the medication error is jeopardizing the health and welfare of the person that you support. You must also report any use of PRN or as needed medication for behavioral purposes. That needs to be reported so that the state can see how often these behavioral medications are being used. What's also reportable with medications is any medication refusals. These are not reportable to the state, but OPG would like to know all of these issues in case medication refusals become a trend. And then you are also going to report any use of an over-the-counter PRN or as-needed pain medication to treat illness or injury. There are also medical areas that we must report as well. One of those is planned medical procedures that require this completion of the internal incident report. Planned medical procedures could range from a person who is getting an appendectomy to a person who's getting a colonoscopy. These are planned. They're not immediately life-threatening, but they only need to be reported through this internal incident report. Any use of immediate care or urgent care facilities to treat illness or injury must also be reported through this. And then seizures require the completion of an internal incident report. Even if you are tracking the seizures in another place in the home, you must also fill out the internal incident report. And then we're also going to report any other issues that occur. One of the big issues that that is reportable is death. If death does occur, then you will call the police immediately if you are the person on shift, and then you will call your supervisor and start determining what you need to do. If death does occur on shift, you know through your CPR and first aid classes that you must immediately start CPR. Alleged, suspected, and actual criminal activity that affects the person's services or could potentially affect the person's services must be reported. This could be alleged criminal activity from a caregiver, from a contractor, from an employee, or from an agent of the provider. It could also be from a family member or a natural support who is around that person. So if the person's services or care are potentially affected, then we will report. We will also report if the activity occurred during those service hours. And then we're also going to report if it occurred when the person was present. So anytime there's criminal activity that could potentially affect the person, we report that. You're also going to report any use of aversive techniques. So those can include the use of seclusion, forced physical activity, painful or noxious stimuli, and any other area that's considered an aversive technique or a prohibited intervention. Please see our YouTube video about that for more information. So what are the takeaways for this? You must report using an internal incident report because you are a mandatory reporter. You're required to do that to uphold the health and safety of the people that you're supporting. You must also report immediately if an incident is representing a severe health or safety issue to you as an employee, other employees, or to the person that you support. Report immediately to a supervisor any employee injury that occurs so that we can ensure that you get medical treatment as fast as possible. And you must report all of these incidents within 24 hours. So please ask your supervisor any other questions you may have, and thank you very much.